The Nightmare. Christopher lay in bed in the infirmary. His eyes were closed and his breathing was slow and labored. Elvira thought that he had punctured a lung. He would be in bed for the whole month of February. She was worried. She let Timothy and Racso look in on Christopher from the doorway for 5 minutes before she shooed them away. "Is he going to be all right?" Racso hated to ask the question, but he couldn't help himself. Elvira didn't look directly at him when she answered. "I don't know. It's a dangerous time of year to be sick. The cold makes it harder to recover." "I don't want him to die." "Of course you don't. None of us does," Elvira snapped. "I had pneumonia, and I got over it," Timothy said softly. Elvira smiled, but her tone was brusque. "You were lucky." "He's going to be fine," Racso said stubbornly. "You'll see." Justin was proud of Racso for recovering the wicker basket, and of Sally for dragging Christopher to safety after he had fallen from the pine tree. The training had been fruitful. The rats had found themselves in a crisis and had responded well. But the fact that humans had come into the valley was a very bad sign. Though they had seemed sympathetic to the wilderness, there was no reason to believe that, should they have stumbled upon the colony, they would have kept quiet about it. After all, journalists wanted news. So Justin assigned a sentry to keep watch over the valley from the mountainside. He ordered the gardens and the playground dismantled and the entrance holes to the nest covered with branches. And he pushed the rats in the training program to do more, so that they would be prepared for any emergency. In the mornings before school, the rats ran a mile without stopping. Sometimes they ran in a group, but other times they were assigned to run in pairs or by themselves. They were given a course to complete by a certain time, and they knew that someone would be waiting to see whether they got there when they were supposed to. In the evenings, they studied a textbook ordered from a computer company, memorizing the symbols that make up the special language of computers. They made mock computer keyboards and practiced composing and entering simple programs on them. Justin kept time, pushing them to work faster, congratulating the rats who met deadlines and consoling those who didn't. Sometimes, after the hardest sessions, Racso cried. He did not tell the others, not even Timothy, but there were times when he simply felt he could not do what was required of him. He tried as hard as he could and failed. Other rats failed too, but they didn't seem to take it as hard as Racso. They tried to cheer him up. "There's always tomorrow, you know." But Racso would walk away with his teeth clenched and his hat jammed down over his ears. He would find a private spot in the raspberry bushes, and the tears would fall. As he cried, he would find that the disappointment eased a little, and he felt more relaxed. Sometimes, by the time he left, he felt positively cheerful. Isabella was having a tantrum. The other rats watched quietly as she jumped up and down. Her tail flailed back and forth. "You can't do this to me," she screamed. "You just can't." Justin tried for the third time to finish a sentence. "I'm sorry if your feelings—" "No, no, no." Isabella hurled herself on the ground. "I love you. I won't leave." Justin tried again. "We talked, and we don't feel that you—" "No!" Isabella shouted, and then she began to weep. "It was because she panicked when she saw the humans," Brendan whispered conspiratorially. "They figured she couldn't stand up to the pressure of the mission if she couldn't get through that." "Anyone can panic," Sally said. "I don't think she should be thrown out of the training program just because she panicked." "In an emergency, you have to be able to control your emotions," Beatrice said. "Otherwise, you won't be able to do what you're supposed to." "Look at Racso," Brendan said. "He sat there He realized what had to be done, and he did it. But he must have been afraid, Sally argued. Anyone is afraid in a dangerous situation. It makes sense to be afraid. Fear and panic are different. Beatrice looked as if she was about to say more, but she turned to Racso instead. How did you feel? He hesitated. I was scared, I think. At least I remember that my heart was pounding. But I wasn't as scared as Isabella, because I'm used to humans. I've been around them a lot. I knew they wouldn't be able to catch me if they started chasing me. And I figured if they saw me, they'd probably think I was a muskrat. So you were able to figure things out, even though you were scared, Brendan said. That was good. Racso smiled. Brendan had given him a compliment. His chest swelled. In fact, everyone seemed to be smiling at him. They liked him. He was as surprised by what happened next as the others. His mouth opened, and he heard himself say, I told a lie. What? The other rats looked surprised. Do you mean that you didn't tell the truth about how you felt when you saw the people? Beatrice asked. Not that. Racso felt the blood running to his head, but he had started to tell them, and he might as well finish. About my family, about living in a mansion with rich people. That wasn't true. I just wanted to impress you, so I made it up. There's more, too. A lump formed in his throat. But I can't tell you everything now. I'm just not ready. You lied about your background. It was Brendan again, and this time he sounded tough. Why should we believe anything you say? Because I admitted it, Racso said. Nobody forced me to tell you. I wanted you to know. Beatrice nodded. That's true. Nobody forced him. I'm glad you told us, Sally said. I never really believed all that stuff anyway. But when will you tell us the truth? Brendan's tone was sharp. I don't know, Racso faltered. Suddenly, Sally grinned. Stay tuned for the next dramatic chapter of Racso the Rat's True Confessions, coming we don't know when on another channel. Everyone laughed, even Racso. Is that really what TV sounds like? Brendan asked seriously. Racso nodded. You just have to make your voice a little deeper, like this. Christopher was worse. He had gotten a virus, and he wouldn't eat. He was so sick that he hardly opened his eyes. Elvira told his parents, and they told Nicodemus. Nicodemus told Justin and Hermione. Hermione told the rats in the schoolroom. She tried to be upbeat, but after she spoke, the room was as silent as at home. Then, suddenly, Sally began to cry. It's my fault. If I hadn't started yelling for him to come down, he never would have fallen. He was trying to signal me to be quiet. You saved him. Hermione's voice was firm. If the humans had found Christopher, they probably would have taken him with them in their boat and tried to care for him. A veterinarian would have told them he was a Norway rat. They might have begun to ask questions. Why were domestic rats nesting in the middle of a wilderness? When Christopher woke up, he might have cried out, not realizing where he was. And then what? It wouldn't have taken them long to connect the talking rat with the little basket. They would have been back. Hermione hesitated. And they would have known what they were looking for. Sally's heart had stopped, and her mouth was open in an O. She had not really thought about what could have happened. It was scary to hear a big animal coming up the bank when I was trying to help Christopher. I dragged him behind an oak tree and covered him up with leaves. And then I ran back and wiped up the blood. I missed some of it, though, because that was the first thing the man saw. How did you feel when you saw the man? Terrified, Sally laughed. I dug myself under the leaves right beside Christopher and didn't look out again until he was gone. You were lucky he wasn't an Indian scout, Racso said. They know how to track animals. If he'd been an Indian, he would have found you. Indian scouts don't paddle metal canoes, Brendan pointed out. I know, but stop. The whole class turned in astonishment. Timothy was on his feet. His body was taut. Someone may be dying. We're sitting here laughing and talking nonsense. Hermione's voice was gentle. We're doing everything we can for Christopher. Not everything, Timothy was adamant. Mr. Aegis gave me a special powder 3 years ago when I had pneumonia. I asked Elvira about it, but she says the plant it's made from doesn't grow in the valley. The trip to Mr. Fitzgibbon's farm in midwinter could take weeks, Timothy. It would be dangerous, and more lives would be risked. We'll be risking lives at the dam site to save many lives, all the animals who live here. I still think we can do more for Christopher. When Timothy sat down, the whole class stared at him. No one had ever heard him argue or raise his voice. Could he be the same mouse who had occupied that seat for the past 3 years? He looked the same, bright eyes, soft gray fur, long whiskers, but something had changed. I just mean that I've never seen you like that before. Racso and Timothy were in the room, sitting on Timothy's bed. You've always been so good. What's wrong with you? Nothing's wrong with me. Do you think you're the only one who can argue? No. Racso was mystified. It's just that I'm not used to you doing it, I guess. Timothy was silent for a moment. Looking at him, Racso noticed that his eyes looked glazed, as if he were also sick. Are you sure you're all right, Timothy? He asked plaintively. You just don't look like yourself. Timothy stared at the floor. Timothy? Racso touched his shoulder with one paw. No, Timothy said, and he looked away. 3 nights ago, I had a dream. I'm not sure whether it was about me or Christopher. During the dream, we seemed to be the same, but it was awful. What happened? Timothy put his face between his paws. I dreamed that I was in Christopher's bed in the infirmary and that I was going to die. And I could see into the future because for me, there would be no future. My bed lifted up and flew out the window like a magic carpet. I leaned over the side and could see things changing, slowly at first, but then faster and faster. Racso was spellbound. What kind of things? I saw the dam being built. The valley began to fill up with water. I saw the rats leaving, going single file over the mountain, carrying their tools on their backs. Many of the other animals stayed too long and drowned. Their screams were horrible. Timothy paused. His voice was weak. But finally, the valley became a great lake, and there were more than 20 roads coming to it. Each road was crowded with cars. Every car was filled with people. Some parts of the valley that had remained above water were turned into parking lots. There were metal garbage cans, and the animals that were left crept out at night to eat from them because there was no place else to get food. I flew on in my bed, following one of the highways, and I saw the Fitzgibbons' house with a road running beside it where the bean field used to be. When I came closer, I saw a sign out front that said, antiques. There was no garden, and the water in the brook looked dark and oily. Where the barn had stood, I saw a restaurant with a big plastic statue of a monkey holding a plate of sandwiches. I signaled the bed to come down, and it landed in the Fitzgibbons' old garden. The big stone was still there, but for a minute I didn't see our cinder block house. Then, when I did see it, I was afraid to go inside. The entrance was blocked with bits of paper and broken glass. I pushed my way through. I called out, but no one answered. The living room was awful. It was littered with bits of junk. In one corner there was a little pile of dried grass. The bedroom was empty. I left and walked toward the brook. I found my family there. My mother, Cynthia, and Teresa. Mother hugged me tight. Martin's taken Bretta and the children and gone away, she said. He said he couldn't stand it here any longer. I saw her brush away tears. We've had to change the way we live, Timothy. They were gaunt, and their fur looked coarse and patchy. We've decided to live by the brook all year round now, Mother said. The sound of the water is soothing. We couldn't get used to the noise from the highway. What do you eat? We've learned to live on the scraps that people throw away, mostly meat and bits of fried potato. What about water? We drink from the brook, Teresa said. It's oily, but you get used to it after a while. Cynthia pushed her way through the others. Are you going to stay, Timothy? Are you going to stay here with us? We've missed you so much. He can't stay, Cynthia, my mother interrupted. One of his friends is very sick. Without Timothy, Christopher may die. But how can I help him? My voice rose in desperation. Don't give up. Her voice seemed to fade. How? Tell me how, I said, and then I woke up. Timothy sat quietly on the bed. He felt exhausted. Racso sat beside him, pondering the dream. You must tell Nicodemus, he said suddenly. Timothy looked surprised. He nodded slowly. Go tomorrow morning, Racso said. He'll know what to do. To save a friend. Nicodemus looked tired and old. I understand how you feel after that awful dream, he said, but I just don't see how we can do it. Justin nodded. It would be a terrible trip, and the sky looks like snow. Let me try, Timothy begged. If only I could get the medicine from Mr. Ages. No, Nicodemus was adamant. Is there anyone else who could go? It would mean Christopher's life. Timothy was getting desperate. Nicodemus regarded him levelly. We can't give up one life to save another, and that's what we would be doing. The mountain is covered with ice. The descent on the other side would be impossible. There must be some way. Timothy's eyes lit up suddenly. What about Jeremy? Justin shook his head sadly. He's not due in for another week, and we have no way to contact him. We have the emergency signal for the couriers. Another crow could drop the message at Jeremy's nest. Justin looked thoughtful. I think it's worth a try, he told Nicodemus. I could go up this afternoon and set up the signal. Nicodemus nodded. Do it then, but you, he turned to Timothy, don't get your hopes up. There's a storm brewing. We may not have a courier until it's over, and that could mean days. All right, but Timothy felt a rising excitement. If they could get the medicine, surely Christopher would get better. He's too sick to eat. Racso told Isabella. She was in the kitchen, her paws deep in a vat of acorn flour. It's terrible. Isabella shook her head. I wish there was something I could do for him. Believe me, I know what it is to suffer. This last week has been the worst of my whole life. That's different. You don't have something physically wrong with you. Rats die from broken hearts too, you know. Isabella paused. I never thought Justin would treat me this way. After all my years of devotion, I think you're taking it too personally. Other rats have been asking to leave the training program too. Isabella stuck out her upper lip in a pout. The others would have reacted the same way I did if they'd seen people. Justin just expected too much of me. He has higher standards for me because I'm special. That made Racso mad. All you can think about is yourself. Everyone else is just as special as you are. Look at me. I made a long trip from the city all by myself. And I know about a lot of things you don't. Telephones and rock stars and movies and Indians and video games and candy. Shut up, Racso. You're nothing but an obnoxious little runt. I won't shut up. Racso was so mad he felt like biting Isabella, calling him a runt. He bared his teeth and growled. Bite me. Isabella flung her paws out wide to each side to show that she wouldn't try to defend herself. Go ahead and bite me, Racso. Bite me. Oh my God. Racso felt stupid. I'm not going to bite you, Isabella. Aha, you're afraid I'd tell Justin, aren't you? I'm not afraid of anything. But secretly, Racso was afraid. Biting was against the rules at Thorn Valley, and Isabella was doing the best she could to make him break the rules. Aren't you just little Mr. Know-It-All? She shouted. Movie stars, potato chips, go-karts, candy. Maybe we ought to bow down and worship you. You know so much. Shut up, Isabella. But Racso's anger had left him. His mind repeated her phrase, ending with the word candy. Candy. He and Christopher had planned to make candy, and now Christopher was dying. He might never get to taste candy. If only he could eat one piece. Christopher loved new things. He had worn the headband every day, had jabbered away in backward language, had sung Sweet Lorinda until he'd almost driven the others crazy. Isabella! Racso forgot the argument. His voice was hushed with excitement. We might be able to help Christopher, you and I. What? We might be able to save him. Sit down. We might be able to save him. Sit down. Isabella sat. She listened, trying to be patient, while Racso unfolded a plan. The mountain path was icy, but the sentries had cut steps into the ice and had strung ropes along the steepest sections to keep themselves from falling. Justin and Beatrice climbed slowly without speaking. The wind whipped through their fur. A coating of ice formed on their whiskers. The sky was gray and overcast. After an hour, they reached the sentry's post, where a small fire was burning. A rat stood beside it, warming his paws. Justin, I didn't expect to see you up here. Shift change isn't for another 3 hours. And Beatrice, too. We've come to try to signal courier, Justin explained, warming himself at the fire. Christopher's much worse. We're going to try to send a message to Mr. Ages. For medicine? Beatrice nodded. He has a white powder made from the roots of a plant that doesn't grow in the valley. Timothy had it when he was sick 3 years ago, and it helped him. He's the one who insisted we try to get it.
I don't think anyone's going to be flying on a day like this,
the sentry muttered.
There's a winter storm blowing in.
We can try. Justin fetched the gleaming white stones that were kept piled beside the wall of the cliff and set them in a pyramid on the flat rock near the sentry's post.
After all, it could mean Christopher's life. He's that bad off?
Justin nodded.
He's unconscious, and Elvira hasn't been able to get him to eat or drink. He's strong, but she doesn't know how long he can last. He doesn't take a turn for the better. Poor kid.
The sentry sighed. Beatrice produced a letter from her knapsack. If anyone responds to the signal, we need this taken to the old foundation just beyond the Fitzgibbons farm. It should be dropped in an obvious place. Explain that there's an old white mouse living there, that he's a doctor, and that no harm must come to him. His powders have saved many lives, including birds.
All right.
There's another message, too. For Jeremy, it should be dropped at his nest. We're asking him to fly the powder here if it's safe to do so.
Got it.
The sentry nodded smartly.
Sure you don't want to warm up a little more before you head back?
We'll be fine, Beatrice said. They nodded goodbye. Timothy walked with Racso past the bare garden plots toward the pond. He felt better. It felt good to have told the nightmare to Racso and then Nicodemus. It was almost as if he had been able to hand over the responsibility for Christopher to someone else. Not that he didn't want to be responsible. He did. It was just that the dream had made him feel so bad that he couldn't think about what to do. All he could do was feel upset.
Dreams aren't real, Nicodemus had said, but often they represent fears that are real. It's not surprising that in the dream you worry about Christopher changed itself into worry about your family in Thorn Valley. You care a great deal about both of them.
That makes sense, Racso said, when Timothy told him.
After all, they're both in danger.
Timothy swatted at the frozen dirt near the edge of the pond. I'd run away before I'd live at that place I saw in that dream, he said. I couldn't stand that.
You should stop worrying about it. Arthur and Justin have finished the plan for the sabotage mission. They're going to unveil it at the training session tomorrow night.
If only the plan succeeds.
Timothy, look!
Racso pointed toward the western sky.
Look! Isn't that a bird up by the cliff?
Timothy squinted at a dark object only a little bigger than a dot. I think you're right, and it looks like it's going to land.
If only it agrees to take the message to Mr. Ages.
If only... Timothy nodded, then smiled wryly. That seems to sum it up right now, doesn't it?
Timothy!
Racso's mouth opened, and then it twitched at the corners, as if he wasn't sure whether to smile or frown.
Look, it's snowing!
The infirmary was dark and quiet. Elvira sat in the corner by the window on a chair made from a curved tree root. She rocked herself back and forth gently. Near her, on a low mattress stuffed with feathers, lay Christopher. His eyes were closed. His chest rose and fell slightly with each breath. Except for that, he was perfectly still. Occasionally, Elvira glanced out the window. Snow blew past in a steady stream. Once she got up and fetched a vial of something from the burner stove in the laboratory. She stirred it and poured it into a small wooden bowl. With a spoon, she poured a bit of the liquid into the sleeping rat's mouth, but immediately he choked so that the broth ran out his mouth and down the gray fur of his cheek. Elvira sighed deeply. Christopher, I want you to drink, she said. But there was no sign that Christopher heard anything at all. The snow continued to drift past the window. How much time passed? How many hours before the gentle rap came on the door? Elvira, dozing in her chair, was not sure. She rose and opened it. A pair of rats stood side by side. Come in. The female hesitated. Is he better? No. Elvira's voice was gentle, but not really worse. He's stronger than he looks.
He hasn't eaten in almost a week.
The male rat sounded hoarse, as if he found it difficult to speak. How much longer can he go on like this? I'm not sure. Elvira shook her head, as if she too were puzzled and upset. Another day or two, perhaps?
There's nothing you can do.
Not right now. Christopher's mother stifled a sob. He's our only child. It's possible that he could recover, Elvira said softly. Try not to despair. Talk to him. He may hear you, even though he can't respond. So the two rats sat down beside the bed and spoke in low voices as the snow continued to fall. When Isabella and Racso met in the kitchen, it was past midnight. Isabella started a fire in the stove. Then she showed Racso how to grind the dried mint into a smooth paste. Add beet sugar. Now more water. It has to be smoother than that, Racso. Isabella was in command. She took the grinding stone away and showed Racso how to scrape it against the bottom of the bowl, using first one paw, then the other. Racso tried again. After just a few minutes, his front legs started to ache. He could hear himself grunting out loud with each push. With a shake of her head, Isabella took the bowl away. She tested the mixture with a spoon, then added soybean milk and a bit of acorn flour. She showed Racso how to form the mixture into small flat cakes. While he did that, Isabella mixed carob, sugar, and peanut oil in a pan on the stove. She took the little cakes one by one and dipped them into the hot carob, then set them on a wooden slab to harden. The cookbook says they should cool for at least an hour, so we'll have to wait.
But I want to taste it,
Racso wheedled.
Just one. Please, Isabella.
Absolutely not. Isabella marched back and forth in front of the candy as if she were guarding a cache of jewels. Racso sat forlornly in the middle of the kitchen. The candy smelled lovely. Minutes seemed like hours.
If it works,
Racso reminded himself.
If the candy saves Christopher's life, this will be a great achievement.
Isabella grunted.
And don't forget that it couldn't have been accomplished without me. I found the recipe and started the fire in the stove and showed you how to grind the paste. And I made the carob coating.
Racso nodded. He had to admit that Isabella deserved some of the credit.
Wait until Justin hears about this,
Isabella said.
An hour's up.
Racso charged to the platter, grabbed the closest candy, and crammed it into his mouth hole. Its gooey sweetness seemed to fill his whole body like a wonderful dream.
More, he shouted. I need more.
You most certainly do not, Isabella said.
The rest is for Christopher.
2 hours before dawn, the sentries came down from the mountain. The snow had become so thick that it was impossible to keep the fire lighted, and without the fire, they could not stay on the cliff face. By the time they reached the nest, their fur was was coated with ice, and their paws and legs were numb. They woke Justin and told him of their decision to abandon the post. He winced sympathetically as he watched them limp toward the infirmary. "A bad night to be out," Elvira said crisply. She rubbed their paws with snow until the feeling began to return. Justin stood watching.
"You'll never guess who picked up that letter you and Beatrice brought up,"
one of the sentries remarked.
"Who?" "A horned owl."
The rat shook his head as if even the memory of the owl was intimidating.
"A really big one. To tell you the truth, I thought he was coming after me. I was terrified. But after he landed, he just nodded toward the pile of stones. I gave him the papers with the instructions you told me, and he nodded again, and then he took off."
Justin was surprised and pleased. "How's the kid doing?" "Better than you'd be now if you hadn't left the mountain the moment you did," Elvira said darkly. "You took a real chance, you know. Another 15 minutes and I don't think you'd have made it down."
"Oh, it hurts."
"That means you can feel." Elvira stopped rubbing for a moment. "We can be thankful for that. By tomorrow you should be as good as new." Racso wrapped 2 pieces of candy in birch bark paper and hid the paper inside his hat. Then he put the hat on his head. He spent a half hour trying to think of ways to sneak past Elvira so that he could be alone with Christopher. But when he got to the infirmary just after dawn, Elvira was asleep in her chair. Racso tiptoed in. He stood beside his friend, watching his chest move up and down.
"Christopher,"
he spoke in a whisper,
"I brought you something to eat."
Christopher didn't answer. His eyes stayed closed. His chest rose and fell slowly.
"It's what we picked the mint for,"
Racso whispered.
"Remember the stuff I told you about, that I used to eat back in the city? We made for you. Some candy."
Racso wished Christopher would open his eyes or move at all, even one paw, but he didn't.
"I'll just put a bit in your mouth so you can see how good it tastes,"
Racso said. He broke off a corner from one piece of candy. He opened Christopher's mouth gently and put the candy on top of his tongue.
"You can just let it melt if you don't feel like chewing right now. It's good that way too."
Christopher was still. Racso thought for a moment that he was dead. He was relieved when he saw Christopher breathe one more time. At the same time, he felt scared and disappointed. Maybe the candy wouldn't help. Maybe Christopher was going to die after all. Maybe he would never see his friend alive again.
"Christopher,"
he whispered.
"I have to leave."
Christopher was still.
"I'll sing your favorite song,"
Racso said. He felt so much like crying that he could hardly sing, but he made himself do it anyway. The song was made to be sung really loud, but Racso did the best he could, singing softly.
"Sweet Lorinda, Lorinda, my love, your touch reminds me of a saucy turtle dove. Your eyes are lovely, like the stars at night. Stay with me, darling, tonight, tonight.